Just past 11:30 a.m. on a gentle Wednesday in downtown Boise, Idaho, Samuel Sam Hargrove, 85 years old, stepped into Dottie's diner as he had done every week for the past 19 years. He was a familiar figure in a city stretching upward with modern glass buildings. Yet somehow, Boise could never outgrow the quiet dignity of its eldest citizens. Faded jeans clung to his lean legs. A flannel shirt, buttoned with care, held memories of the 60s, and an old ball cap, emblazoned with USMC K-San, sat tilted on his snow-white hair. Sam carried a history few paused to ask about. Parachute jumps into the darkness of Korea, endless nights in Vietnam's trenches, and decades of silent resilience after returning from battlefields so distant, their memories still clung to him. The weight of those years showed in every slow step, in the deep wrinkles etched across his face like a map of sacrifice and survival. All right, my dear audience, brace yourselves for a story that'll leave you speechless. Take a second to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly connect with what I'm sharing here. And drop a comment below to let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always thrilling to see someone joining us from all corners of the world. Sam stepped into the diner. His worn leather shoes brushed the wooden floor, creating a soft but meaningful sound, like the heartbeat of a soldier that never stops beating. To him, Dottie's diner wasn't just a place to eat. It was a sanctuary, a haven where he could sit quietly, letting the nightmares of war fade amid the aroma of roasted coffee and the gentle laughter of nearby families. He chose the wooden table by the window, where pale golden sunlight slipped through the curtains, illuminating his ball cap. The USMC lettering stood out, like a vow that never faded. Sam ordered his usual, a cup of black coffee, unsweetened, bitter as memory, a plate of golden scrambled eggs beside crisp toasted bread, and a slice of pumpkin pie that Dottie, the diner's owner with her warm smile, always saved just for him. That pie was a small gift, a reminder that, though war had taken so much, there were still moments worth cherishing. To the young waitresses, Sam was a mystery wrapped in reverence. They gazed at him with curious eyes, trying to imagine how this man had faced death, how he had dragged comrades through mud under a hail of bullets. Regular customers, from truck drivers to the elderly couple at the corner table, greeted him with familiar nods. No words needed. Sam never spoke of Kei-san, of the nights he stayed awake to keep his brothers alive, or of the times he woke in a field hospital tent, breath heavy but heart still beating for a sworn oath to protect. Those stories he held tight in his chest, like invisible scars, but his presence, though silent, said it all. He was the soul of Boise, a living piece of history, a reminder that the pages of war books weren't just words, but people like him, still walking among the everyday. Age had slowed Sam's steps, each movement a quiet struggle with weary joints, but his eyes remained sharp, as if still seeing the frigid forests of Korea, the Vietnamese trenches thick with the smell of gunpowder. Sometimes, while sipping his coffee, he'd furrow his brow slightly, as if hearing a distant comrade call his name. Those moments revealed a different Sam Hargrove, not the 85-year-old man by the window, but a young soldier, backpack slung over his shoulder, ready to face the darkness. But then he'd smile, a smile light as a breeze, as if to say he'd learned to live with the memories. To Dottie, Sam was more than a customer. She saw him as a brother, a father, an irreplaceable piece of the diner. Each time she set a slice of pumpkin pie before him, she'd lightly touch his shoulder, a small gesture filled with understanding. Sam responded with a nod, his eyes sparkling with gratitude. But that Wednesday, something was different. Not in Sam, not in the way he sipped his coffee or nodded to the waitress. The difference came from a man sitting 2 tables away, a motorcyclist in his 30s, leather jacket covered in tattoos, steel-toed boots clacking on the floor. He placed his glossy helmet on the chair, his cold, sharp gaze fixed on Sam the moment he walked in. And when Sam's presence inadvertently delayed service, a small storm began to simmer in the stranger's heart, ready to erupt. That Wednesday morning, Dottie's Diner in Boise, Idaho, was immersed in a tranquil scene. Everything seemed to move to a gentle rhythm. The clink of spoons and forks against porcelain plates rang out, like tiny notes in a symphony of everyday life. The soft laughter of a family at the corner table blended with the smooth strains of country music from the old radio on the counter, creating a warm, familiar atmosphere. October sunlight slipped through the windows, casting beams across the polished wooden tables where the aroma of freshly roasted coffee and toasted bread mingled, evoking memories of small-town mornings. Samuel Hargrove, the 85-year-old veteran, sat quietly at his usual table by the window, his gaunt hands cradling a cup of black coffee. His eyes, sharp yet pensive, seemed to gaze not only at the white ceramic mug, but also through time, back to the trenches of Quezon, where the roar of gunfire once drowned out every sound of life. In Sam's heart, this diner was a refuge, a small corner where he could let the memories of war sink into silence, if only for a moment. He sipped his coffee, his lips pursed slightly, as if savoring not just the bitter taste of the drink, but also the years gone by. His calm demeanor, like a mountain standing firm against the wind, was something the waitresses and regulars always cherished. But that day, the serenity of Dottie's was disrupted by a stranger's presence. A man stepped in, carrying an aggressive air like a sudden storm. He, a motorcyclist around 35 years old, moved with arrogant confidence, his heavy steel-toed boots clacking on the wooden floor, each step like a declaration of war. His black leather jacket, adorned with vibrant tattoos, clung tightly to his muscular frame, and his glossy helmet was carelessly placed on the chair beside him, a symbol of his reckless defiance. He sat down, 2 tables away from Sam, his cold, sharp eyes scanning the room, as if searching for a target to unleash his anger upon. In his mind, a fire smoldered, fueled by nameless frustrations, by failures he would never admit. He ordered his food in a loud voice, overpowering the country music, causing a few patrons to glance his way, though none dared speak. His presence was like a crack in the diner's peaceful tableau, and it began to widen when the young waitress, with her radiant smile, paused to pour more coffee for Sam. That act, small but meaningful in the routine of Dottie's, unwittingly ignited the anger in the motorcyclist's heart. He felt ignored, slighted, though no one intended to offend. That brief delay, mere seconds long, became the excuse for him to unleash the resentment he'd been harboring. He muttered, his voice loud enough for the entire diner to hear, as if he wanted every eye drawn to him. His words, sharp as a blade, sliced through the air, causing a few patrons to stop chewing, their eyes stealing glances toward Sam. What does this old man think he is? He sneered, the dry, harsh sound echoing, a blatant challenge. His gaze locked onto Sam, waiting for a reaction, a glance, a frown, anything to fuel his anger further. But Sam gave him no such chance. He sat still, back straight, his USMC Quezon ball cap tilted, like a flag that never falls. His hands gently turned the coffee cup, gaunt fingers tracing the porcelain rim as if caressing a distant memory. To him, the stranger's taunts were mere whispers of wind, too weak to touch the long nights he'd faced death, or the moments he'd dragged comrades through mud under a hail of bullets. Sam's silence, instead of quenching the fire in the man's heart, was like pouring oil on it. He felt insulted by that calm, as if it were a reminder of his own shortcomings. In his mind, Sam was just a useless old man, a faded shadow in a world he believed he ruled with strength and noise. He couldn't see the dignity in Sam's eyes, couldn't recognize that this old man had faced nightmares he could only imagine. But that very blindness, that baseless anger, pushed him toward a dangerous line. And Dottie's diner, in that moment, was no longer a peaceful eatery. It became a stage where two worlds, one of patience and dignity, the other of arrogance and discontent, were about to collide in an inevitable explosion. Samuel Hargrove's silence, like an unyielding fortress wall, seemed only to fan the flames of rage in the motorcyclist's heart. He, with his tattoo-covered leather jacket and clacking steel-toed boots, felt Sam's calm as an invisible insult, a challenge to the arrogance he used to mask his deep-seated insecurities. In his mind, Sam wasn't a veteran, not a man who had faced death through long nights of war. He saw only a slow old man, a faded shadow he believed he could easily overpower. But that blindness, that contempt, was pushing him toward an irredeemable mistake. He stood up, his muscular frame moving with brazen confidence, his steel-toed boots striking the wooden floor, like the beat of a drum signaling an impending battle. He stopped before Sam's table, his eyes narrowing, locking onto the USMC K-San ball cap on the old man's head. That lettering, silent yet proud, like a story he refused to understand, only fueled his anger further. To him, Sam's presence was a reminder of his own shortcomings, the failures, the times he felt small in a world he tried to dominate. He mocked, his voice sharp as a blade, ringing out in the quiet space of Dottie's diner, causing a few patrons to glance over, their hands pausing mid-spoon. He waited for a reaction, a glance, a frown, anything to keep his anger burning. But Sam gave him nothing. He sat still, his gaze unwavering, his gaunt hands still turning the coffee cup, as if the taunts were just a distant echo, too weak to touch the war memories he carried in his heart. Then, like a bolt of lightning, he acted. A swift, forceful slap struck Sam's head, knocking the ball cap to the wooden floor. The sound of the slap rang out, sharp as a gunshot, freezing the diner in its tracks. Spoons hung suspended in midair, eyes widened in shock, and a few phones were quietly raised, capturing the unbelievable moment. In the hearts of the patrons, from the young waitress to the elderly couple in the corner, a mix of outrage and helplessness surged. That act wasn't just a slap, it was an insult, a knife slashing at the dignity of a man who had sacrificed his life for his country. But in Sam's heart, that slap was a minor pain. Nothing compared to the nightmares he'd endured, the nights under a rain of bullets, the times he dragged comrades through mud, blood mixing with earth. Sam sat still, his lips pressed tightly, as if holding back a wave surging in his chest. The slap didn't shake him, but it stirred a deep sadness, a place where he wondered if the world still remembered what he and his comrades had sacrificed. In his mind, this moment wasn't the first time he'd faced insult. He'd heard taunts in war, seen doubting eyes when he returned from K-San, But he always chose silence because dignity didn't need to be shouted. He bent down, his gaunt hands picking up the ball cap, fingers tracing the USMC K-san lettering with care, as he once closed the eyes of those who never woke. That act wasn't just protecting an object. It was a silent affirmation that no slap could erase what he'd endured. He placed the cap back on, his gaze locking onto his attacker. Not a look of anger, not of hatred, but a piercing calm, like a sword forged in the fires of war. In that moment, Sam wasn't just an 85-year-old man. He was a soldier, a survivor, a symbol of resilience. The man before him felt a vague unease. The sneer on his lips trembled, as if he sensed he'd just touched something greater than himself. But he hid it, clinging to his arrogance, as if his action was a victory. In the diner, the air grew heavy, like the calm before a storm. The waitresses stood frozen, their hands trembling slightly. Patrons looked at Sam with a mix of reverence and sorrow, unaware that this moment, captured by phones, would soon spread. But in Sam's heart, there was only certainty. The man could slap him, but he couldn't slap away his dignity. And Dottie's diner, in that moment, became a battlefield, where patience and arrogance clashed, and where Sam, though silent, had already begun to triumph. Dear audience, take a moment to relax, grab a glass of water, and keep listening to this story. The twists are still to come. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always exciting to see someone joining us from all corners of the world. Drop a 1 in the comments if you're loving this story, so we can keep bringing you more incredible tales. After the slap rang out like a gunshot, the air in Dottie's diner grew heavy, as if time itself had stopped. Samuel Hargrove, the 85-year-old veteran, sat motionless, his sharp eyes devoid of any ripple of anger. In his chest, a wave of emotion surged, not from physical pain. The slap was nothing compared to war's wounds, but from a deep, quiet sorrow, a silent question. Did the world still remember the sacrifices of him and his comrades, or were they just faded words on his USMC K-san ball cap? But Sam didn't let that sorrow take hold. He had learned, through long nights under a hail of bullets, that dignity didn't need to be shouted, didn't need fists to prove itself. He took a deep breath, his gaunt hands gripping the edge of the wooden table lightly. As if anchoring himself to memories of days, he stood firm against the darkness. The man, the motorcyclist with his tattoo-covered leather jacket, stood before Sam, trying to hide the unease rising in his heart. That slap, to him, was a declaration of strength, a way to assert his place in a world where he always felt slighted. But Sam's calm gaze, like a mirror reflecting his own smallness, made the sneer on his lips tremble. He wanted Sam to fight back, wanted to see the old man crumble, but Sam's silence was a power he couldn't comprehend. In his mind, a storm of unease churned. He had expected an easy victory, but now, standing before this 85-year-old man, he felt himself losing, though no one had spoken a word. Sam didn't shout, didn't raise a fist. Instead, he spoke, his voice low and steady, like a proclamation forged in the fires of war. That action will be your burden, not mine. Those words carried no anger, no hatred, but the confidence of a man who had faced death hundreds of times. who had walked the line between life and death without bowing. They were like an invisible blade, slicing through the man's arrogance, making him falter, if only in his mind. He tried to laugh loudly, the dry, harsh sound echoing, a desperate attempt to mask his unease. But that laugh quickly died, as he realized every eye in the diner was fixed on him, not with admiration, but with judgment. The waitresses stood frozen, their hands trembling slightly, as if trapped in an unbelievable moment. Families at nearby tables whispered, their voices filled with sorrow and outrage. An elderly couple in the corner shook their heads, their eyes on Sam a mix of reverence and heartache. To them, Sam wasn't just a regular, he was a symbol of Boise, a soldier who carried history on his shoulders. "That's Sam Hargrove," they murmured. "How dare he do that?" Those words, though soft, were like an unspoken verdict, making the man's confidence begin to waver. He puffed out his chest, trying to hold on to his arrogance, but deep down he felt a void, a sense that he had just touched something far greater, and he wasn't ready to face it. Sam, still sitting with his back straight, refused to let the slap shake his dignity. He pulled a small notebook from his flannel shirt pocket, his hands moving slowly, as if opening a page of memories. He jotted down a date for a veterans event, his gaunt fingers gliding across the paper with care, as he once checked his weapon before battle. That act, small but steadfast, was a silent declaration. The slap was merely a passing breeze, not strong enough to bring him down. In Sam's mind, this man wasn't the first enemy he'd faced, and that slap wasn't his deepest wound. He had endured taunts in war, faced doubting eyes upon his return, but he always chose to stand firm, because he knew true strength lay not in fists, but in patience and self-respect. The diner remained steeped in silence, the air heavy, like the calm before a storm. Patrons looked at Sam, their eyes filled with a mix of reverence and sorrow, as if witnessing a hero insulted yet unbowed. A few phones stayed raised, capturing the moment, unaware it would soon spread, becoming a story far greater. But in Sam's heart, there was only certainty. The man could slap him, but he couldn't slap away what he stood for. And Dottie's Diner, in that moment, was more than a restaurant. It was a battlefield, where patience clashed with arrogance, and where Sam, with his silence, had already begun to triumph. Less than 30 minutes later, a powerful sound erupted, like thunder tearing through the diner's silence. The roar of engines, the screech of tires on pavement, signaled the arrival of a force not to be trifled with. 3 armored military vehicles rolled up, massive and imposing, followed by a sleek black SUV gleaming in the sunlight, and a jeep bearing the flag of the 5th Marine Regiment, fluttering like a symbol of loyalty. From the SUV, a tall man stepped out, Colonel Michael Hargrove, Sam's son, about 50 years old, his face chiseled as if from stone, his sharp eyes radiating courage. His chest gleamed with medals from 3 tours in the Middle East, each ribbon telling a story of bravery and sacrifice. In Michael's heart, a fire burned, not of anger, but of profound respect for the father who taught him that honor was never to be traded. Michael entered the diner, his military boots striking the wooden floor evenly, each step a declaration that the Hargrove family never bows. Behind him, dozens of Marines, in crisp uniforms, moved in precise formation, their presence like an unbreakable steel wall. Their arrival made the air in the diner oppressive, like the prelude to a great storm. Patrons, from the young hostess to families at nearby tables, stepped aside, their eyes wide with awe, as if witnessing a scene from a movie. In Michael's mind, the man who slapped his father hadn't just insulted an individual, he had touched a symbol. A soldier who had sacrificed a lifetime to protect the values Michael, too, swore to uphold. There was no room for hesitation, no room for leniency. Michael strode straight to his father's table, ignoring the curious stares and hushed whispers. Sam, though age made his legs tremble slightly, stood up, slowly raising his hand in a military salute, a gesture carrying a lifetime of pride. In his heart, this moment was an affirmation that his sacrifices hadn't been forgotten, that his son, carrying the family's flame, stood here to defend his dignity. Michael returned the salute, his firm hand touching his forehead, his eyes shining with absolute respect. Between them was an invisible bond, linking the battlefields of Korea, Vietnam, and the Middle East, a legacy of loyalty, sacrifice, and a profound father-son connection. Sam spoke, his voice soft but weighty, like a whisper from the past. He hit me, not hard, but enough to make me think I'd been forgotten. Those words, though quiet, pierced Michael's heart like a blade, stirring not pain from the slap, but anguish at the thought that his father could feel his years of fighting had been overlooked by the world. Michael turned to the motorcyclist, who now looked like a child caught in the act, his arrogant smile gone, replaced by panic. In his heart, his confidence crumbled, like a building hit by a bomb. He didn't know who Sam was, didn't know who Michael was, but the presence of dozens of Marines, with their cold, piercing gazes and unyielding formation, made him feel he'd committed an unforgivable mistake. Michael faced him, his voice sharp as steel, ringing through the silent space. "Do you know what you've just done?" That question needed no answer. It was an accusation, a reminder that the man's action wasn't just a slap, but an insult to an entire generation that had sacrificed. The man stepped back, his hands trembling slightly, his eyes darting away, as if trying to escape the weight of this moment. The diner became a stage, where Sam's dignity and the attacker's regret collided. Patrons looked at the Hargroves, their eyes filled with reverence and emotion, unaware that this moment, captured by phones, would soon spread, becoming a story far greater. In Michael's heart, there was not just outrage over his father's humiliation, but a profound pride for the soldier who had sacrificed his life for his country. He recounted, with a calm but weighty voice, what his father, Samuel Hargrove, had done, parachuting into enemy territory under pitch-black skies, dragging comrades through mine-filled fields as bullets whistled, and staying awake for weeks to protect his unit in desperate hours. Each word he spoke was like a chisel, carving into the air the story of a man who lived so others could live. "You didn't just slap a veteran," Michael said, his voice low like a verdict. "You slapped everyone who sacrificed so you could sit here." The motorcyclist, his face pale, felt the weight of those words pressing on his chest. In his mind, the arrogance that once shielded him now shattered. He didn't know who Sam was, didn't know the battlefields he'd walked through, but Michael's gaze and the presence of dozens of Marines made him realize he'd made an irreparable mistake. His hands trembled. He stepped back, his fingers fumbling for the helmet on the chair, as if it were the only thing left to cling to. In his heart, a wave of regret surged, not from fear, but from beginning to sense his own smallness before a man he'd once scorned. Michael, with the authority of a soldier, commanded, his voice sharp but needing no shout. "Shake his hand, not because he needs it, but because you do." Those words, like a battlefield order, allowed no refusal. The man reluctantly extended his hand, trembling, his eyes lowered, like a child facing the consequences of a reckless act. Sam, sitting upright, grasped that hand, but his gaze held no forgiveness. It was a permanent reminder, a piercing look, as if saying his dignity could never be taken. In Sam's heart, this moment wasn't a personal victory. It was an affirmation that what he and his comrades sacrificed still lived, still mattered, even if the world sometimes forgot. As the motorcyclist hurried away, his steps unsteady, like fleeing Sam's gaze, the Marines stood tall, raising their hands in unison, a salute of absolute respect. They marched out, their boots striking the wooden floor evenly, leaving a thick silence, as if the space still echoed the power of the moment. Patrons, from the young waitress to the elderly couple, watched, their eyes shimmering with reverence and emotion. A few phones stayed raised, capturing the scene, unaware that this video would soon spread with the title, "Never Insult a Veteran. This is what happens." Within 24 hours, the video reached millions of views, becoming an inspiring story, a reminder of the value of loyalty and dignity. Sam didn't change. He returned to Dottie's each week, still ordering his black coffee, scrambled eggs, and pumpkin pie, still tipping exactly 15% with a gentle smile. In his heart, the incident wasn't a triumph to boast about, but a chance to remind the world of what he stood for. When reporters swarmed, asking about justice, he replied, his voice low but firm, "Justice is when you live, so others remember." Those words, simple yet profound, touched the hearts of those who heard them. He began visiting local schools, sitting on small chairs, telling children who'd never seen a soldier about war, about self-respect, about standing firm in adversity. His eyes, though dimmed by age, still lit up, seeing young faces listen intently. 4 years later, when Sam passed, the flag on his coffin was carefully folded and given to the waitress who'd poured his coffee for nearly 2 decades, a gesture of quiet gratitude. In her heart, Sam wasn't just a regular. He was a teacher, a symbol of resilience. On his gravestone, beneath his name and rank, was the inscription, "He endured and taught us how to stand tall." Those words, like a final proclamation, spoke not just of Sam, but of a generation that sacrificed so the world today could exist. And his legacy, through the stories he told, through the viral video, lived on, reminding everyone that justice isn't revenge, but living a life worth remembering. Thank you for joining us. Subscribe to Veteran Best Stories, and don't forget to let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always exciting to see someone join us from all corners of the world. Drop a 1 in the comments if you loved this story, so we can keep bringing you more incredible tales.